आपको पिछले 2 संडे में धनंजय गोखले जी ने जो डिस्क्लोजर नॉर्म्स के ऊपर या फाइनेंशियल की प्रेजेंटेशन के ऊपर जो सर्कुलर आया है रिजर्व बैंक का, उसके बारे में हम लोग 2 संडे बात कर रहे थे। ये आखिरी संडे है जिसमें जो डिस्क्लोजर्स है उसके मायने क्या है, उसके इम्प्लीकेशंस क्या है, वो अगर हम सही ढंग से करते नहीं तो उसका इफेक्ट क्या होगा। ये वीडियो उसी के बारे में। देयर आर सम कंट्रोवर्शियल पॉइंट्स व्हिच वी हैव डिस्कस्ड। ऑफ कोर्स it's not necessary that you all should agree to what I say, but then if you like the video, please do share it. Please press the subscribe button so that you will get the notifications whenever I upload a video. Thank you for watching. नमस्कार दोस्तों, पिछले 2 संडे से हम लोग एक जो 100 पन्ने का सर्कुलर है मास्टर डायरेक्शन ऑन फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट, जिससे हम धनंजय गोखले जी जो चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट है और बहुत सारे बैंकों को सलाह भी देते हैं। वी हैव बीन टॉकिंग अबाउट द वेरियस प्रोविजंस which are applicable to urban cooperative banks. We have almost covered everything. There is only one section to be covered, that is part B of that circular, which is about guidance on specific issues with respect to certain accounting standards. So in today's session we will cover all the aspects in part B. Of course, the sections which are relevant to urban cooperative banks, those would be covered in this session, and we will be ignoring anything about the foreign exchange, because there are very few banks which are actually AD1 license holders and they have the capability of interpreting the guidelines under this circular carefully. But for smaller urban cooperative banks, it's still a dicey issue. Therefore, we'll start today with Dhananjay ji on part B. Sir, part B talks about the accounting standards, especially the accounting standard 5 and accounting standard 9. That is net profit or loss for the prior period items, changes in accounting policies. The only thing I would like you to clarify is about the prior period items and the revenue recognition accounting standard 9. These two are the key things I would like you to talk on that. Sir.
Yeah, as far as this part B is concerned, it talks about only certain specific issues. So per se, this part B doesn't cover all the accounting standards which are applicable. So we need to keep in mind that all accounting standards are applicable, and these are few accounting standards wherein RBI has drawn some references about. So the accounting standard 5, the reference is about prior period item. So as far as prior period item is concerned, the accounting standard was earlier also applicable, still it is applicable. Only thing is that RBI has defined materiality concept over there. In the accounting standard, materiality concept is presumed to be taken care of. In the sense, for each and every entity, the materiality standards will differ because it will be based on volume, value, and so many things.
Okay.
So here RBI has made it kind of a definition wherein they are saying that materiality is in terms of amount, it is 1% of your total income or 1% of total expenditure or 1% of your profit or 1% of your loss. So that is considered as material. Now what is really prior period item is that it is a kind of a error or omission which might have occurred related to earlier years. Okay. So for example, if you haven't made a provision and in the current year you have incurred that particular expense, that's a typical example of prior period item. And prior period item is not a kind of difference in estimation and actual expenses. So for example, suppose you make a provision for say 5 lakh rupees of say electricity expenses and the actual bill is say 5.10 lakhs. So it's only a judgmental error which is a minor thing. So there is no error and omission. So this is not a prior period item. So prior period is basically a error or omission which have skipped your attention, which relates to the earlier year. Second thing is that there might be certain instances wherein the amount of income or expenditure might be related to prior period, but that has got crystallized in the current year. So for example, a typical example might be that suppose there is a rent arrears. So there is a leave and license premises which bank has taken, and the leave and license period has already expired. So lease period is expired and there is a negotiation which is going on with the landlord. And maybe after a gap of 1 year, there is a retrospective effect of new rent which the bank has given. So this is not a prior period item because the crystallization has occurred in the current year. So that's not a prior period. So these are couple of instances wherein prior period can be called for.
Normally, sir, what happens after 31st of March, the finalization of audit takes place in 3 months' time. I mean, it's possible that error has been detected somewhere in the month of May or June, and the auditor has not signed it off. So normally, bankers are using that memorandum of changes, which is popularly known as MOC. So if the item is factored into the 31st March position via MOC, this standard is still applicable to such kind of an event?
No, this standard will get avoided for, because whatever error you have noticed, if it gets cured actually, then there is no question of prior period.
Okay. But if it doesn't get cured, then what position bank should take?
No, there is nothing like a position. The bank has to disclose that item. So prior period item can be income as well as expenditure. So suppose some income has escaped because of some error. Maybe say processing fees which bank hasn't recovered, and in the subsequent year it bank realizes that the processing fees were in arrears and it has recovered that. So that's an example of prior period income. So it can be either way, income as well as expenditure. There are a couple of tricky issues which might occur related to taking a decision whether a particular thing is prior period or not. A typical example is say wage revision agreements. So many times in banks, the wage revision takes place after a gap of maybe 1 or 2 years after the original wage agreement gets expired. Now what happens is, whenever the wage revision agreements occur, the arrears of wages are paid. And that's where the possible controversies might arise, because one argument is that one can say that there is no wage revision which has taken place. So there is a possibility that wage need not be revised upwardly. It might remain stagnant and the bank doesn't make a provision. That can be one stand. And wherever the in whichever year the wage revision agreement is signed off or it is crystallized, that might be the year wherein the bank will say that this is current year expense, because now the liability is known. But as far as the trend is concerned, typically wage revision always takes place in upwardly position, maybe barring few very stray instances. So it's always a kind of prudence which should have prevailed, that some kind of provision should be made. But then again the question is that what kind of provision one can make. Because in the absence of wage agreement or in the absence of even the negotiations, it's very tricky to crystallize as to what kind of provision has to be also made. So this is a typical case wherein it can always be debated on the either side, and one can have different views about that. But typically prior period is more of error or omission of a particular item.
As far as prior period is concerned, there is one more question which I wanted to ask, is that the urban cooperative banks across the country have been taking one particular position, which in fact Reserve Bank of India has buttressed many a times, that after the conclusion of the financial year, the statutory audit report say finalized around the last week of June, and then there are some recoveries in NPA account, and by taking up those recoveries either partially or fully, whatever the case is, the banks do consider that these recoveries are prior to signing off of the statutory auditor, and therefore these are required to be factored. I mean, there have been various debates on this particular matter. This particular circular doesn't make a reference to any of such kind of a prior period item. Typically prior period item, भाई हमारा रिकवरी का पूरा सेल का हो गया था लेकिन पैसा हमारा मई में आया, तो हमको ये अकाउंट जो है वो पूरा बंद हो गया मई में, तो हम वो मार्च के एनपीए में नहीं दिखाएंगे, बिकॉज दी now the NPA account doesn't exist in the books. So these are all borderline cases where as a banker the banks have been taking a position कि नहीं हम लोग इसको NPA में करेंगे, and there are instances where Reserve Bank of India has also considered it proactively and has rather ignored कि भाई तुम्हारा statutory audit sign off होने के पहले तुम्हारा recovery हो गया, fine. Looking at these guidelines where no such reference is there, no such instruction is there, how will you advise the urban cooperative bank on this particular matter where the recoveries are taking place post 31st of March?
See, actually it's not a prior period item. It's possibly you are referring to accounting standard 4, which talks about events occurring after the date of balance sheet. As far as recoveries in NPA accounts are concerned, which have occurred subsequent to the cutoff date, that since we are talking about financial year end, so let's presume that 31st March is your financial year end, and signing off of the balance sheet is say in the last week of June. So whichever recoveries are made in NPA accounts, wherein the accounts are normalized, in the sense all recoveries are made. So let's not get into that partial recoveries and other things. So let's presume that all the overdues are recovered as on a particular date, but the date is subsequent to 31st March. Now, as far as events occurring after the date of balance sheet concept is concerned, it talks about the concept wherein the event or a particular circumstance was already existent as on 31st March, and subsequently there is a kind of evidence which has been gathered to prove that on a particular date, that is on 31st March, what kind of circumstances had existed. So it's just to give an example, a parallel example. Suppose there is a fire in a particular factory on say 30th March, and the assessment of damage was done on say 10th of April. So the fire took place on 30th March, but the assessment was carried out on 10th of April. So to make a provision for that particular loss, the assessment report of 10th April will be used. So this is typically a case of event occurring after the date of balance sheet. Another example is that suppose a fraud has occurred, or maybe a cash theft has occurred prior to 31st March, but a quantification of amount has taken place maybe subsequent to that March. So this is a typical case of event occurring after the date of balance sheet. Coming to the earlier point about recoveries in NPA on subsequent date, that is something which per se is not an event occurring after the date of balance sheet. It's a normal event. Like suppose you have recoveries on say 10th of May. So it's a recovery which is made in normal banking business. So there is nothing which relates to 31st March. On 31st March the account was overdrawn or maybe having 4 installments overdue. So it's a clear-cut NPA case. Now whenever a financial statement is prepared, that financial statement is always prepared for that financial year and as at a particular date. So we need to look at the position as on 31st March. What happens subsequent to 31st March can be only handled in a conservative manner. Now what is mean by a conservative manner is, suppose there is an account which is NPA as on 31st March, may be classified as a substandard asset, and subsequently certain events have occurred which might have prompted the banker or the or the auditor to maybe consider that as a loss asset. Maybe after that there is a controversy around, maybe a legal dispute around the underlying immovable property which has cropped up in the subsequent year. So that is something wherein a conservative view is required to be taken, wherein the value of the property might be reduced and a higher provision might be warranted. Something of that sort. But if there is a recovery which is made subsequently, that can never be factored in on 31st March, the account will remain into NPA. I will also like to just add one point. Let's presume that there is a exactly opposite case, that a particular account is standard account on 31st March and the account falls into NPA category on 10th of May. So maybe that 2 installments were overdue on 31st March and now 4 installments are overdue on 10th of May. No bank will categorize that as an NPA account as on 31st March. So whenever a bank wants to claim that it is an event occurring after the date of balance sheet, it should go on the both sides.
Objectively they should look at it. Then I would like to talk about the accounting standard 17, that is about segment reporting. So the business segments and how it has changed, and the geographic segment, how you can inform the viewers as to what they should look for this particular accounting standard.
See, as far as AS 17 is concerned, that was already in existence. The major change which has been made over here from UCB's perspective, because there is no change as far as scheduled commercial banks are concerned. But since now almost all things are parallelly applicable to UCBs as well as scheduled commercial banks, there is a new business segment which is required to be disclosed, which talks about corporate and wholesale banking. So earlier it was typically banking, treasury and other banking business. So these were 3 segments which were divided.
Right.
So now within banking, it will be corporate and wholesale banking and retail banking.
Okay.
Now we need to understand another point, that what is meant by corporate and wholesale banking is something which has to be decided by the bank. There is no hard and fast rule as to what is meant by wholesale banking and what is meant by corporate banking. So that
each bank can decide.
Each bank has to decide based on.
There has to be a policy now.
Correct. So the bank has to decide a policy, and secondly, that policy has to be consistently followed.
Okay.
So maybe someone might say that some percentage of my total advances or some percentage of my total deposits, or someone might say that certain amount, actually any business above that particular amount. And secondly, this concept is always a dynamic concept. So for example, I'm just giving an example, like suppose a bank says that whatever borrower accounts I'm having above 5 crores, I will say that it is a wholesale banking.
Okay.
And the dynamic situation might be that in a year, actually a particular borrower is categorized under wholesale banking. Maybe in the next year he falls under other banking, that is retail banking, because he's dropping down below 5 crores.
Right.
So it will keep on changing. The real challenge will be to gather that data or to collate that data. That will be the real challenge. But otherwise, there is not much of a change actually. Only thing is that the bifurcation has to be done by the bank.
Done by the bank. And what about the geographic segment?
Yeah, geographical segmental reporting is the second level reporting. For
Okay.
UCBs per se, it will not apply, because in geographical segment, if you look at AS 17, it talks about domestic business and outside India business. So for UCBs, at least till now, we don't have any
Right.
UCB having a branch outside India. So it
Right.
will not really apply.
Coming to accounting standard, related party disclosures, a lot of things have changed as I see this. How do you advise the urban cooperative banks on this?
Yeah, actually, again, it's a change for UCBs and not really a change for typically corporate banks, because this disclosure is little focused on corporate sector per se. Nevertheless, things are parallelly applicable to cooperative banks also in most of the cases. Now, there are two important aspects which one has to keep in mind while giving a disclosure under AS18. Firstly, related party disclosure warrants the bank to give disclosure of all related parties, typically related to key management persons, that is KMPs, directors. So when you are giving disclosure of related parties, the list of related parties is required to be disclosed as per the accounting standard. And secondly, then the transactional data is required to be given. So suppose we are having say 10 related parties, it is not necessarily that there will be transaction with those 10 related parties. Maybe say there might be just 1 or 2 related parties wherein the transactions have taken place. Another second important factor which one has to keep in mind is, as far as the related party disclosure is concerned, presumingly that suppose under a particular criteria of related party, there is only one single party is there with whom the transaction has taken place. So that's where the bank is not supposed to disclose those transactions, because otherwise it will be a kind of disclosure related to a particular person.
Okay.
So let's take an example that suppose only CEO is the key management person in a particular bank, and that is disclosed by the bank that KMP is only CEO. So all the details of key management person, the related transaction will be given. So a person who is reading the balance sheet will simply understand that whatever is given to that key management person, that is the CEO. So the individual related information will never get disclosed by AS18. So that will always get excluded.
So एक single CEO है, CEO अगर है तो वो key management personnel में नहीं आता है.
No, he will be included, but then transaction data will not be
Will
disclosed.
not be disclosed. Okay. Okay. इसमें भी ये जो स्टेटमेंट दिया है, the statement that they have given, they are talking of parent, subsidiaries,
Correct.
associate, joint ventures. ये शायद urban cooperative banks को apply
Most of
होने-
the banks will be
will not have
falling
this.
only into key management personnel,
Right.
that is KMPs and relatives of KMPs.
Right.
So ideally directors and in most of the banks only CEOs or see KMP is something which one has to define again. So if someone is having say a CEO and deputy CEO for example, and if the bank says that both are key management persons for me, then both will be included.
Okay.
But typically it's director and MD or CEO.
Okay. There is accounting standard 24, discontinuing operations. Can you elaborate this discontinuing operations? And they are saying that merger or closure of branches may not be deemed to be considered to be reported under this.
Correct.
So how do you advise the UCBs on this?
See, actually, AS24, that is discontinuing operation, talks about typically a case wherein an entity closes down a particular business segment. So for banking sector, it's practically rarely applicable. But let me just give a couple of examples. Hypothetical example. For example, a bank might be having a locker business, and the bank decides as a strategic decision that they will exit out of locker business. So the lockers will be locker business is closed down. So that's a typical case of discontinued operation. Or another example is that let's presume that a credit card division is there for a bank, and that business is shut down by that bank. Or maybe a bank assurance business which a bank is doing, and the bank is exiting out of that particular business. That is called as discontinuing operation. For UCBs, it's practically rare, but let me just give you another example. Is that suppose I'm just drawing a reference from a commercial bank perspective, that a commercial bank exits out of say retail business, which recently was done by a couple of banks. So that's a kind of discontinuing operations in a limited extent, because still the banking operations are on.
Right.
So you cannot say that. So for a cooperative bank, it will be rarely the case. Maybe that some banks might be giving a franking facility, and that facility gets discontinued. But again, you need to look at the materiality and what kind of impact it will be having.
Right. Accounting Standard 25 talks of the interim financial reporting, AS 25.
Yeah.
Typically, reading this, it appears that it is applicable to the commercial banks only.
Yeah.
तो यूसीबीज के लिए शायद तो ये होगा ही नहीं इंटरिम फाइनेंशियल रिपोर्टिंग.
It won't be applicable.
It won't be applicable.
It won't be applicable.
Okay. And then there is Accounting Standard 26 which talks about the intangible assets.
Yeah.
This is definitely applicable. So can you elaborate on what this standard prescribes?
Yeah, see, actually, intangible asset, typically when we are talking about banking sector, because otherwise there are multiple instances that like, patents, rights and other things. So let's not talk about that, because per se it shouldn't apply to cooperative banks. For cooperative bank, the typical example might be customized softwares which the banks are purchasing, like say CBS, just to give an example. And why I'm saying customized software is that you cannot define operating system under this AS26. It will form part of your asset, because operating system is required to run your machine.
Right.
So a typical example is that suppose a bank has opted for a new CBS system. It has purchased that under entrepreneur model, and ideally it should be written off over a staggered period. So typically for a computer software, the expected years are say 3 to 5 years. That's a typical benchmark. So every bank has to define that what is the useful life of my intangible asset.
Okay.
So the intangible assets are typically these assets which will get covered under AS26.
AS26. Yeah. Then Accounting Standard 28, which talks of impairment of assets. What will you advise the UCBs on this?
See, UCBs, or rather on the overall applicability of AS28 is concerned, it's more focused on fixed assets, not really focused on investments or inventories.
Right.
So suppose the investment is turning into a non-performing investment, AS28 doesn't apply. There are different guidelines for non-performing investment. So these are the typical instances wherein a fixed asset which is in use, if the bank recognizes that asset, that it has impaired, so that asset can no more be used. So that is called as impairment of the asset, and immediately the entire book value of that particular asset will be charged to your P&L account. For example, suppose a bank is having maybe a typical make of ATM machine, and because of certain regulatory guideline changes or certain upgradation of technology, those ATMs are now redundant. In the sense, those cannot be used. So those are called as impaired assets. They are no more in use. Another example is that maybe the bank is owning a vehicle, and the vehicle is beyond repairs and it is not useful anymore. So it can be an impaired asset. So that has to be entirely charged to your P&L account.
Okay.
It is beyond depreciation actually. It's like charging the entire balance value into a single year.
Okay. Moving on to the disclosure in financial statements. The first disclosure is about the regulatory capital, composition of regulatory capital. How this applies to the urban cooperative banks, or they're saying applicable for UCBs. There are some strict marks that they have given.
Right.
So how will you clarify this? Because there is a strict mark, common equity tier 1 capital. They're saying the urban cooperative bank should disclose.
Correct.
So I mean that's where some clarification is required, sir.
See, out of that, very few line items are really applicable to UCBs. like it's more about what is your share capital or more about your capital adequacy per se. So like for example, paid up share capital and reserves as percentage of risk weighted asset. So these are applicable to UCBs. So whichever is applicable to UCBs, that has to be disclosed.
Okay.
Secondly, there are certain sub tables which have been given.
But these were not there earlier, or these have
they were not there in this format.
Okay.
So earlier also
standard was there.
But this is not standard now. This is not disclosure.
This is
so
only
the standard
disclosure.
part is over.
Yeah.
So the accounting policies and that part is over. Now we are getting into disclosure part.
Okay.
So only the format had changed. So the way the paid up capital will be presented has got changed.
Okay.
Otherwise, most of the things were disclosed, but it will be disclosed in a now uniform manner. And movement of tier 2 capital will also get disclosed. So everything was disclosed earlier also. Only thing is that tabular formats has been undergone a change.
Okay. This asset liability management, which was never disclosed by the banks, has now come as a new thing. I mean, people do not understand what the hell asset liability is. Why, with this disclosure, it's only the regulator who will get. But then the regulator always gets such reports every quarter.
No, it's now from the stakeholders' perspective. I will give you an example. So typically, as all the bankers are aware about, asset liability management is nothing but your future expected cash inflows and outflows and matching of that. So it is supposed to indicate any mismatching of liquidity position for the bank in various buckets. So a reader of the financial statement will now understand that whether a particular entity, now here we are talking about banking entities, so we'll talk about banking entities. Suppose a reader feels that a particular banking entity is heading towards a liquidity mismatch, so that is something which will get revealed over here.
But this can always be camouflage, no? How do you...
Not really. The RBI guidelines are straightforward in that. I'm worried about other factor. Forget about how the banks will disclose that, because banks will go as per the RBI circular. The biggest challenge is that it is now forming part of your financial statement. So the these figures will be kind of audited figures. And practically speaking,
अगर किसी बैंक में फिर ALM स्टेटमेंट सिस्टम पे नहीं हो या फिर वो मैन्युअली बकेटिंग करते हो तो वो तो इसमें मर गए सब.
That is one. And secondly, the bank should now make this data available to the auditor to verify.
Right.
See, till now it was not disclosed on the face of your financial statement.
Right.
Now the moment it becomes part of your notes on account, it means that it is audited. And it's a kind of projection actually. Projection on certain parameters.
But then the auditors now will question the bucketing that you are doing on the asset as well as liability, and how you have a mismatch, because there is no quantum of mismatch in any of the segment here. So the reader, other than the one who is a banker, will never understand that there exists a mismatch.
See, the auditor doesn't have to question the bank about the mismatch.
What exists will be told here. Fine.
That will be told. Only challenge for the auditor is that the banker should be able to provide him the underlying data to prove that the ALM statement is correctly prepared.
Okay.
So that will be the real challenge, because right now the softwares which are throwing the ALM figures, the auditors are required to believe those figures.
Let's not talk on that, because every bank is
that's a different thing. But let me just add one more point. See, ALM figures are very much verifiable, provided the auditor is given an opportunity to use CAD tools.
Okay.
And so far the experience of the auditors, in general I am saying, there might be a few exceptions to this statement. Bankers per se are not comfortable to give access to the auditor to the database to use CAD tools. For whatever reasons, let's not get into those reasons. So on one hand,
bankers can deny that? Bankers cannot deny that basically.
But that's the reality. Okay. That it's not a kind of accepted norm in most of the banks that the database is given to the auditors.
If Reserve Bank of India really wants a transparency, they should hellbent on the banks that they should give the data, period.
I completely agree. But the experience so far has been different. And at the same time, as far as CAD tools are concerned, CAD tools day by day those are getting advanced. Yeah. So if you have really an expert who can use CAD tools in an effective manner, I won't say half of the job the auditor is done.
आप जो बोल रहे हैं ना वो बिल्कुल सही है, लेकिन यहाँ पे सिचुएशन ऐसी है कि हमारे बैंकों ने, अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंकों ने CBS तो कर लिया, लेकिन सीबीएस का जो इस्तेमाल करना है ना वो अभी तक नहीं जानते. सो दैट्स वेयर द इशू पिंचेस. हम लोग ये वीडियो इसीलिए कर रहे हैं कि भाई आपके सामने क्या आ रहा है वो समझो. इफ यू आर नॉट डूइंग इट इन अ प्रॉपर वे यू आर गोइंग टू फेस लॉट ऑफ डिफिकल्टीज. सर please, I interrupted.
So the CAD tools are something which in years to come will definitely get used. Looking at the increase in volume of transactions also, that is something which is required to be used by the auditors. But I have a different suggestion that essentially the bankers should think of using CAD tools to analyze the data. See, right now all the bankers are completely relying on the CBS system. They don't have independent system to assess the data. In the sense, just to give again an example. Most of the banks have now experienced that the regulators, when they are doing inspection, they do data crunching. So that's a popular belief. Okay. How they do that is something which one has to understand. So if you get a raw data, you need to have tools which are capable to analyze based on that raw data.
Probably that's where the Reserve Bank of India has migrated to your data dump, and they have the analytical tools to understand what kind of input you are giving.
Precisely.
And what exists.
And there are
post PMC, that's where the things have changed to a great extent.
So in fact, bankers should not wait for auditors to use that CAD tools. Right. They can internally start using that. And frankly speaking, since we are on UCB topic, the risk-based internal audit, certain portion will get covered through this usage of CAD tools.
Right. I will now come back to investment disclosures that have been given here, and I would like you to help us.
Yeah.
In that particular statement, they are saying total investments, less provision for non-performing investment, less provision for depreciation and NPI.
Right.
What the hell is this?
See, interesting part is that this is a very comprehensive investment portfolio disclosure. So it gives almost entire details of the structure of investment which a bank is holding into different categories. So like AFS, HFT, HTM, and each and every type of investment is divided into that. So that is the first thing. So which will disclose almost the entire investment portfolio of the bank.
ये NPI क्या है?
Yeah. Secondly, non-performing investment will get disclosed over there, and under which category the non-performing investments are there, that will also get disclosed. So for example, suppose you have debentures of a company, like say Island FS, just to give an example for namesake, and the investment has turned into NPI, so it will fall under the debentures category. If you have FDs with maybe a bank, let's say
DHFL or anything like that,
or maybe say PMC or something of that sort, so it will fall under that category. So the reader of the balance sheet will not understand the name of the investment in the sense with whom you have taken the exposure, but he will understand that under which category this exposure is taken, which has turned into a bad investment. Secondly, there is a adequate disclosure which is required to be made for provision of non-performing investment, which is similar to like BDDR. Only difference is that for provision of NPI, you have to make 100% provision. Right. So there is no slab-wise concept.
There is no pass-through phase for non-performing investment. So, NPA हो गया.
Correct, and there is no standard asset provision also.
Okay.
But another thing is that there is a IDR which is required to be disclosed. That is mark-to-market provision, which is a depreciation in your investment. So there is a difference between IDR and provision for NPI. Provision of NPI is parallel to BDDR. IDR is something wherein your valuation of your investment has deteriorated, and you are making a provision of mark-to-market related to your trading portfolio. So one cannot mix up IDR and provision for NPI. Both are different.
Okay.
So I will give you a simple example, since that is something which many UCBs might face in the current year. RBI has already floated scheme of PMC revival, in the sense merger into a small finance bank and other things. So as far as banks who are having exposure to PMC, they have already made 40% provision in last 2 years, like 20%.
20% relaxation.
So that 40% is provision for non-performing investment.
Because of the exemption given by Reserve Bank of India.
It was a staggering which was given. So that is a 40% provision for non-performing investment which is made. Now in the current year, what will happen is, against that exposure, there will be a instrument which will replace that investment. So what is specified in the draft, let's presume that prevails. So it's preference shares and equity warrants. That's what the banks might get. And in the earlier circular, which was issued 2 years back, RBI has already stated that whenever such replacement will happen, that investment will be considered standard investment to begin with.
Okay.
So what will happen is, with all the banks which are having exposure to PMC, that exposure will turn into a performing investment now. Whenever the amount will get converted into preference shares and equity warrants. So provision for NPI will be redundant, in the sense that is reversible. But then there will be a question about mark-to-market concept, because it will be your AFS portfolio.
Right.
So your preference shares will be mark-to-market based on coupon rate of proposed 1%, and whatever is the credit rating which the small finance bank will get. Based on that, the valuation will be done, similar to non-SLR bonds valuation which is done. So let's presume that 100 rupees is my face value and my mark-to-market valuation is say 35 rupees. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. So provision, that is IDR, is required will be 65. So I am getting 40 rupees of reversal of provision of NPI, but I will be required to make a provision of 65 of IDR. So both concepts are different, both are above the line concept.
तो इसका मतलब ये है कि पीएमसी के बारे में तो जिनका भी डिपॉजिट का एक्सपोजर है वो तो आसमान से गिरा और खजूर में अटका ऐसे हो गया. स्कीम विल बी फाइनलाइज्ड, बट देन ये जो ट्रांसपेरेंसी यहाँ पे लाए
हैं, so from provision for NPI it will get converted to IDR.
Right. So real time there is no benefit unless some relaxation here on provision for depreciation for such paper is given.
As on date, there is no such relaxation.
We don't know. We'll cross the bridge when it comes.
Correct.
Is there anything that you would like to talk subsequently?
Yeah. Then in next table actually, that is part B of that. Part B talks about movement of provision of depreciation and IFR.
Okay.
So that's where all this. Yeah, the trick is wherein the movement of depreciation will also get disclosed. Now, where the trick is,
बैंकों को नंगा करके रख दिया.
See, wherever the bank has are required to make a provision of IDR, that will get amply disclosed over here.
Okay.
So one can draw various kind of inferences from that as to whether the investment decision is wrong, correct or wrong. But that is something which is not supposed to be drawn from over here. It's more of disclosure. There is nothing like a good decision or a bad decision. Okay. But that's how the inference might be drawn.
Okay. There is sale and transfer to and fro from HTM category. There is not much a change. So
because it is prohibited.
Yeah, prohibited. So that issue is gone. Non-SLR investment portfolio के बारे में भी कोई change नहीं है.
No, Para D is little tricky because there non-SLR newly added non-performing non-SLR will get disclosed.
Yeah, very true.
So,
very true.
Reduction as well as addition, everything will be disclosed, and one of the major part which was already existent actually, that after closing balance you need to write down total provision held.
Right.
So one can simply understand as to whether the compliance with provision of regulatory compliance is made or not. So suppose you have 100 rupees as closing balance, ideally your total provision should be also 100 and not less than that.
Right.
Unless there is kind of staggering which is permitted.
Right. For e-repo transaction there is not much change.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
But then classification of advances and provisions held, asset quality.
Right.
The new terminology that they have introduced in this particular disclosure is that floating provisions,
correct,
which was not there earlier.
Yeah.
So how do you advise the banks to do this? I mean, how first the concept and then what precautions they should take.
See, asset quality, they have added a couple of things in the same kind of a single table, like upgradation, write-off, recoveries, everything is now combined in a single chart. So that is a good thing. So you don't have to give multiple tables. It's all in one kind of a thing.
There is one tricky area which I would like to advise. Unlike the commercial banks, Reserve Bank of India has categorically advised in the IRAC master which they issued on 1st of October, where they talk about the write-off, what they will do and how they will do. As far as urban cooperative banks are concerned, they are saying nothing about the write-off. Despite the fact that the law provides, the other state law and multi-state law provides for write-off. And here is a statement for urban cooperative bank, they are talking that you should disclose write-off. How do we interpret this?
See, firstly, write-off which cooperative banks are doing, it's a prudential write-off. So per se, it's limited only to that extent. It's not like a waiver of any loan.
No, it's not something
It's
like
not a waiver.
disallowed also.
It's not a waiver. It's only a prudential write-off wherein I'm just squaring off my position and trimming down my balance sheet.
That is all fine, but then why RBI has not issued any advisory to urban corp? What could be a perceivable reason for that?
There
कि
is
इनको करने मत दो यार, ये सब सत्यानाश करके रख देंगे, ऐसा लगता होगा उनको?
It doesn't appear so because they haven't prohibited that also.
No, they have not prohibited. They have accepted the position.
Correct.
But then they have not issued any advisory also. There are banks, hundreds of banks which are doing it prudently. वो statutory auditor का certificate लेंगे, AGM में जाएंगे, सब करेंगे because it is now a life under which they have to do it.
Correct.
But then why regulator is not viewing this? Coming back to this table, ये यहाँ पे तो लिख दिया. इसका मतलब है कि उनको they are agreeing that urban cooperative banks can write off.
No, not like that. See, if RBI has included something over here, they have already categorically stated that whatever is applicable to UCBs that should be adopted. So it doesn't mean that
नहीं, इसका मतलब अगर कल जाके लोग निकालते हैं कि ये राइट ऑफ अर्बन यूसीबीज को एप्लीकेबल नहीं है तो क्या होगा?
No, I will come to that point. So at the same time, the circular says that whatever is specified in a particular act which is applicable to an entity, that will prevail. Okay, so now in State Cooperative Act
even in
multi-state, right of is very much, that process is given. Process is little different, but process is given. So it is permitted for the bank. It's not required that RBI has to reiterate a position which is given in a law.
Okay.
So if a law prohibits that, then the real question will arise. But fortunately,
law permits that.
Taking that particular position, one can talk about write-offs. And ideally, the write-offs, it's better that the bank will somewhere mention that it's a prudential write-off and not a kind of a waiver. So, like for example, say debt waiver scheme is there.
UCBs don't do waivers, so
it is not permitted actually.
It's not permitted at all.
Correct. Now coming to the floating provision part. So floating provision is something which you make over and above your required provision. So suppose BDDR is asking you to make say 10% provision. And the bank makes provision above that, that's a floating provision. But now again,
पिछले संडे जो हम BDDR की बात कर रहे थे,
again, I will never say that BDDF is a floating provision. It's a fund which is created. It's not a provision.
Okay.
There is a difference between provision and fund.
Okay.
So provision is something, or a floating provision is something which is prudentially made.
So charged to P&L.
Charged to P&L.
Okay. So even if it's a floating provision, it must be charged to P&L and not via appropriation.
Correct. See, now RBI has made it very clear that regulatory as well as prudential provision will be above the line. So there is no question of doing something below the line and saying that it's my floating provision. So it nullifies that position.
Right.
So floating provision is something which a bank is maintaining over and above what is regulated provision. And movement of that is not required to be disclosed. Now, possible reason over here is that using floating provision, one can kind of play around with requirement of charging on P&L account. For example, if I am having good numbers, I will make a floating provision, which will take care of my future BDDR regulated required provision. So from floating provision, it will go, in the upper side of the table. That is what is regulated provision. So a reader of balance sheet will also understand that how the bank is utilizing floating provision. See, there are multiple usages of floating provisions are there. One is that I can make use for my regulatory provision. Second possible use of floating provision is that I will reverse my floating provision above the line because I have created that above the line and naturally it will support my bottom line. So the reader of the financial statement will now understand that how the floating provision is used by the bank. So there will be a greater transparency.
Okay. And then there is sector-wise advances and gross NPAs as a disclosure. This is something new that has come.
This will throw light more on what is the bank's experience about a particular sector. So they are divided into two parts, priority and non-priority, and within that there are 4 sub-classifications are there. So gross NPA figures are required to be disclosed along with percentage of that. So it might happen that a bank might be not doing well with say a service sector, for example, or maybe not doing well with personal loans. So that percentage wise disclosure will be there.
Okay.
So again, it's a kind of greater transparency, nothing to do with financial impact.
Okay.
As we discussed, in the our first session itself, last week, this guideline is about disclosures, not about financial impact.
Okay.
So it's only asking the banks to disclose more and more.
Come out open. Come
Right.
out in the open.
Right. Exactly.
See, there are other 2-3 things which I am not going to ask you to talk because they are well known. Like particular set of resolution plan, I am not going to ask you a
Correct.
question. Divergent asset classification, of course, is not applicable to urban
Correct.
cooperative banks. The details of financial assets sold to heirs, I am not going to talk, and so on and so forth. Again, the disclosure under resolution framework, I am not going to talk. But if at all there is something which you would like to highlight on the subsequent financial disclosure,
Right.
they are saying something about the half yearly disclosure made, वो भी शायद हमें
It's not applicable.
it's not applicable to us. So let's forget about something which is not applicable to us. If at all you find something which I have not covered, you can ask me to cover. I'll do that
Yeah,
definitely.
one
But there is
thing-
one area I would certainly like to talk about is that exposure to capital market. There is one area that talks about bridge loans to companies against expected equity, and you were telling me that this is a tricky area and how tricky it is, and because of what it is tricky, that I would like you to explain.
See, as far as exposure to capital market is concerned, this disclosure talks about certain aspects, and one of them is bridge loans. It's not directly impacting cooperative banks per se, because theoretically bridge loans will never be sanctioned by UCBs.
Right.
Indirectly, many a times the UCB might end up in taking exposure to capital market, or ending up in kind of funding for bridge loans. I will give you an example. In many cooperative banks, the purpose of loan or the end use of the loan is specified as business. So at times, the end use is something like maybe a director takes a loan against his immovable property. End use is that he is going to use that for funding his company. So he is introducing that as a kind of introduction of equity share capital. So the bank has to ask itself first thing is that whether the bank was intending to fund for equity share subscription, and that's where the trick is. In the sense, most of the banks.
I mean, when you talk about this, the first thing that occurs to my mind is that many of the cooperative banks have clear-cut loan against the properties, where the property is mortgaged, and they are talking that you encash the value locked in your asset,
Yeah.
and they lend.
Right.
Of course, the Reserve Bank of India has now come down heavily on end use and purpose
Correct.
and all that
Correct.
things. Those things have come up. But there are banks which give you money against your property to introduce as a capital in a business
Correct.
that you want to own or whatever it is.
Correct.
So you mean to say if it is granted like this, it can be considered by Reserve Bank of India as a bridge loan?
It's not exactly a bridge loan, but it's more of funding for your equity shares. I will give you an example. For example, tomorrow, suppose say there is a IPO, and a person approaches a bank that he wants a funding for subscribing to IPO. Practically,
You cannot do that.
Exactly. Now we are talking about IPO, and your instant reaction was also that the UCB shouldn't be doing that because it is not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Just replace IPO with private limited company. So indirectly, banks are anyway funding in the same concept. That suppose my end use is defined that I am going to subscribe equity shares. Just because it is not a IPO, I cannot say that I can do that kind of a business.
नहीं सर, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि I am lending against property. It's a genuine transaction.
No, transaction is genuine. I am not disputing that. But the purpose for which the banks have lent
No,
that
it's not.
particular
It's not
portion.
against expected equity flows. It's investment in that company. That's what the defense the cooperative bank will take.
Precisely. So that's why I give an example of IPO. Like suppose I want to subscribe to say a listed entity.
नहीं सर, ये बहुत ज़्यादा स्ट्रेच कर रहे हो आप इसका इंटरप्रिटेशन, ऐसा मुझे लगता है. फिर भी you have a view.
See, the reason is that the moment I replace listed company with private limited company, it cannot change the nature of my
नहीं
loan.
सर, होता है ना चेंज. प्राइवेट लिमिटेड कंपनी और पब्लिक लिमिटेड कंपनी और यहाँ पे पब्लिक आती है. एंटायर मार्केट इज देयर. प्राइवेट लिमिटेड दो बंदे चला सकते हैं ना.
Okay. Now,
So it is not exposed to the public.
Let me give another example. Okay. Let's presume that a person approaches you with a immovable property and says that I want to, take an advance against that, and I want to invest heavily in the market, share market.
Sir,
Naturally,
sir, why I'm asking you again and again repeatedly for a simple reason. There are leading urban cooperative banks, I should not name them.
Yeah.
And they have been marketing a product where they say that unlock the value and potential in your property, will grant you loan against your property for your business purpose. So investment in a business is a business purpose.
Okay. Now I will come to the point. Okay. Now let's presume that this is the argument. So an individual avails a loan against property. I'm saying individual and not the company. So individual avails a loan and he makes an investment in the form of equity shares in a private limited company.
Correct.
So he becomes a kind of a investor.
He owns the company, boss.
But he's an investor.
Right.
Because corporate entity is different and individual is different.
Okay.
So firstly, the cooperative bank has to admit that they are funding for investment. So for investment activity, the UCB has started funding. So that is the first thing. Secondly, typically whenever the end use is verified by any typical cooperative bank, usually it is either a consumption loan or if it is a business
Asset
loan.
creation.
So it's a consumption loan or asset creation loan, or it can be income generation activity related loan. Now when one invests in an equity share, can you call it as an income generation activity? Because dividend is uncertain. You never know whether the dividend is going to come or not. I will stretch this example further. Let's replace private limited company with a partnership firm. And a partner avails a loan for introduction of capital in the partnership firm. It's not an income generation activity per se.
But there is standalone cash flow that has been tied from his business, nothing to do with this new company. What is wrong?
There is nothing like that which is possible under Partnership Act. Secondly, the second best way is that if the bank is convinced that this business is going to run, let's take a positive example. There is no bar on bank directly lending to that entity.
That is true. Sorry for a little bit diversion, because
I just thought that I will caution that.
Very true. Then there is one new chapter that has come under number 6 about the concentration of deposit, advances, exposures and NPAs. This is a new disclosure that has come and is applicable to urban cooperative banks also. Just cover up all 4. No issues.
Yeah. See, this concentration of deposit, advances, this is the data actually which all the banks were giving to regulator during their inspections.
Right.
So the data collation is not really a challenging task. I shouldn't say that it is a challenge, but in a way it's a challenge that all this data will get disclosed in the financial statement. So your top 20 depositors value in terms of percentage terms and value terms will get disclosed. Same way concentration of advances, also top 20 largest borrower worth will be disclosed, and that will be compared with your total advances. Very important point is that about concentration of exposures, one has to understand that here what is expected is exposure and not the outstanding balance.
Okay.
So the disclosure is based on exposure and not really based on my ledger balances. So that is one thing. Para D talks about concentration of NPAs, wherein top 20 NPA as compared with total NPA ratios and value will be disclosed. That might be a little bothering issue initially, in the sense that this information was never disclosed, so it will get disclosed. Besides that, there is not much of a challenge, because
सवाल आएंगे AGM में और क्या होगा?
Beyond that, there is nothing.
There is nothing. Right. There is one non-financial disclosure which is interesting, and I feel for the first time this non-financial disclosure talks about the disclosure of complaints, and they are referring to 1 January 27 circular where they are talking of 15 different types of or common types of complaints that have come, and you have to give the tabulated information. Previous year में कितना था, current year में कितना था, वो भी ombudsman के बारे में है, यानी जो कंप्लेंट ombudsman के पास नहीं गई है उसको आपको कवर नहीं करना है. रूटीन में अगर कंप्लेंट आता है तो उसको आपको कवर करने की जरूरत नहीं. अगर कोई बंदा ombudsman में जाता है तो उसका डिस्क्लोजर आना चाहिए.
No sir, I will just correct one part.
Yeah.
It talks about both complaints. One is which is from office of ombudsman. Second is normal complaints also. So it's and in part A.
Okay.
So whichever complaints the bank has received, the bank is supposed to disclose that in this tabulated format.
Okay.
Now what will happen is that again, it's a new disclosure, so in the first year it's
I know,
going to be
know.
having a different kind of impact on the reader of balance sheet.
Right.
But one thing is very certain actually, with all these disclosures, it will be a kind of transparent system.
Yeah.
Reader of financial statement means I will talk more from stakeholder side, like shareholders or depositors. They can compare banks in a very matured way.
Performance भी comparison हो सकता है कि
required data is available.
Yeah.
At the same time, nowhere in this entire circular the identity of any customer is getting revealed. So, that fact remains. It's more of disclosure of your financial health.
Right.
So if you are healthy and if you are transparent enough, I don't think that there will be any issue in disclosing all these things.
There is one interesting disclosure that has come. It was earlier prevailing via circular.
Yeah.
It is regarding the disclosure of penalties imposed by the Reserve Bank of India.
Right.
Now, you might have seen that last year, Reserve Bank of India penalized almost 120 urban cooperative banks for various reasons. As far as penalties to the commercial banks or the private sector banks, the issue doesn't arise because the owners are stalwart, so no issues. For urban cooperative bank, penalty लग गया मतलब टेंशन मेंबर्स का बढ़ गया, बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स का भी मेंबर का टेंशन उसमें बढ़ जाता है. नाउ ये जो डिस्क्लोजर आया है, ये डिस्क्लोजर में कुछ बैंक्स इन गुजरात और कुछ बैंक्स इन कर्नाटका डिड वन फनी थिंग. व्हाट दे डिड, ये पेनल्टी तो लगा दिया छोटा जो भी है 25 लाख 50 लाख का अगर लगाया होगा, तो उन्होंने क्या किया, ये सब एम्प्लॉयज़ जो है वो एम्प्लॉयज़ ने ये पेनल्टी कंट्रीब्यूट किया. इसका मतलब ये कि बैंक के P&L में पेनल्टी डेबिट आया ही नहीं. पेनल्टी तो लग गया है बैंक को, लेकिन बैंक के P&L में आपको दिखेगा नहीं वो, क्योंकि दैट वाज कंट्रीब्यूटेड बाय द एम्प्लॉयज़. This example I am quoting because I would like people or the urban cooperative bankers to understand what the regulation is and not to do certain things which are incorrect. So I would like you to throw light on the whole story and on this disclosure.
See, firstly, disclosure of penalty was always a mandatory part. It's a mandatory thing since years actually. Means RBI has always been insistent by earlier circular also, that wherever the penalty is imposed by RBI, the bank is supposed to disclose that. So there is no question about non-disclosure. As far as recovery of penalty from staff is concerned, that is something new for me also. I have never come across such kind of instances wherein RBI penalty is recovered.
कुछ भी कर सकते हैं.
Means I have seen instances wherein amount which the bank has lost due to fraud at times has been recovered from certain staff members. Maybe not because they were responsible for that, but maybe they were not alert, as far as that part was concerned.
Protect the bank.
Yeah, so it was more from different perspective, kind of a punishment, I should say. And anyway, fraud is something where, again, even in fraud also, that is something which has to be disclosed. It's not that it can go undisclosed.
Yeah.
Coming back to the practice which you were referring to, see, if a bank tries to recover a penalty from staff members, presumingly that amicably they have arrived at this kind of recovery. Firstly, if such recoveries are made, that has to be disclosed in P&L account. So penalty should come on a debit side, and on the credit side it should be recovered from staff member. That should be the disclosure. You cannot knock it off. So second thing is that as far as such recoveries are concerned, I have another issues about such recoveries. There might be a kind of question which might arise because of such practices, is that what is the reason why this penalty is recovered from the staff members? Means, see, the only possible inference, as I said, about fraud, that if a person is negligent and because of which the fraud has occurred, he is not party to the fraud, but he was negligent, he was careless, and that's why he has been penalized. So if that is the case, then there might be another aspect of staff accountability which might arise. For example, just to give an example, suppose that there is a divergence which has been found out and the bank is penalized for divergence. Let's take a plain vanilla example. So it means that the particular staff member possibly was negligent to identify that particular borrower account as NPA, and because of which he is made accountable. Some kind of that. If that is the inference which one can draw, it's bank's judgment to whether to recover that or not, or whether to penalize to maybe partial extent or not. But another thing which one has to think about is that whether there is any angle related to such recoveries which which are hinting at possible fraud, not really a fraud because fraud is a bigger word, but maybe a misstatement which was done by the particular staff, and what kind of staff accountability action the bank has taken against him. If this kind of recovery is made from the entire staff member, like say suppose a bank is having say 1,000 employees, and penalty is say 1 lakh rupees, so everyone contributes in an equal manner, that is something which is little odd actually. Means if someone has done that, it's up to them naturally, because it's like willing payer and willing receiver concept, but that is something which has to be disclosed adequately. But this doesn't absolve from disclosure in this particular paragraph.
Right.
So in fact I will put it in a different way, that a bank has to disclose that penalty was imposed on the bank, and they should also disclose that it was recovered from the staff members.
Both ways.
So in P&L also they have to disclose, in notes on account they have to also disclose. Let's not talk about why that decision is taken, because
Right.
that's
It just occurred to my mind, therefore I asked this question.
But netting off is something which should never happen.
Yeah. I believe that almost the critical points in that disclosure and the part B, which is applicable to urban cooperative banks, has been shared or enlightened by Mr. Dhananjay Gokhale. If you find that there are a couple of areas which this discussion or this interview or this chat has not covered, please do let me know on the email which I give at the description, at the end of the description while sharing the video. कुछ भी सवाल हो, कुछ भी आपको लगता है कि इसके बारे में हमें नहीं समझ में आ रहा है, प्लीज़ डू लेट अस नो. वी विल ट्राई टू हेल्प यू आउट इन अंडरस्टैंडिंग द थिंग्स इन अ बेटर वे. Please do keep watching the channel, share the link, share the video, and like the video. It doesn't matter if you do not like, because there could be views where you may have a different view, but then do just subscribe. Thank you so much for watching my channel.